statutory definitions of terms the government said I believed meant, that I must believe meant something different than what I said I believed they meant. The jury actually requested those statutory definitions. The court refused to allow them to see those definitions, the words of the statute, and instead furnished them with prosecution-written substitutes for those definitions and instructed the jury to use those substitutes in its deliberations over whether or not what I believed was credible. So really an outrageous and bizarre, unique kind of event, but the object, of course, was to attempt to frighten people away from reading my work and seeing what it actually does say, and from acting on it once they learn what it says and how the tax actually works, which tens of thousands have done, and with the effect of receiving the complete refunds of everything that they have had withheld from them, or have paid in, or have had collected from them in connection with the income tax from both the federal government and state governments. And all of those acknowledgments by these governments and these surrenders to these claims and these complete refunds have gone on throughout the entire 12 years that the government has been assailing me from the very week that my first book was originally published in 2003. So the whole thing is a corrupt effort to suppress information the government finds hugely inconvenient and yet cannot dispute, and in fact acknowledges continuously. So it's a very Stalin-esque kind of affair, and I hope people pay attention to the reality here and not be misled by the superficialities.
The thing that really caught my interest here and why I called you to get you on my show was when another guest of mine informed me that your wife, Doreen, had been sentenced to 18 months in prison, followed by a 1-year supervised release, after for basically failing to denounce you.
Yeah, well, more particularly failing to commit perjury at the government's instruction. As part of the 12-year effort to frighten people away from cracking the code, in 2006, after its initial series of lawsuit efforts directed towards enjoining the publication of that book, had failed, and the government had found itself obliged to move for the dismissal of each and every one of those actions. The government came back 4 days before tax day in 2006 with a lawsuit falsely claiming, by the way, that that complete refunds that had been made to my wife Doreen and me for 2002-2003 had just been a big error. It had just been a big mistake. Nobody was paying attention, and these things just slipped through the cracks and were made by mistake, and the government wanted to reclaim those refunds. It was an entire fabrication. In fact, those refunds had been, the returns that led to them had been scrupulously studied by the government. We had the paperwork from the government that was issuing throughout the entire period during which they were attempting to not issue those refunds, and then eventually agreeing that they were valid and correct, and going over them with a fine-tooth comb. We have a dozen pages or more of documents that were indicated various degrees of government study and decision-making and conclusions about those returns and the claims on them and the refunds that were to be issued prior to the issuing of those refunds. So the initial basis for this suit was a fraud. And it's revealed even more clearly, not just by that documentation, which is posted on my website, by the way, not just by that documentation, but also by the remedy that the government sought. It claimed that our filings were false, and this is a word it loves to use, and that we actually owed money or owed taxes to the government for those years rather than being due the refunds, was unable to produce an actual examination report to say this, but did produce a false examination report. The anonymous examiner actually said in the declaration attached to the quote unquote examination report, this wasn't actually an examination. We didn't actually make an examination of the Hendrickson stuff, but they filled out this form anyway, and makes it kind of look as though they had done that, and that was the basis for the government's claims. But the remedy that it sought was to ask the court to order my wife and me to repudiate our freely made original 2002 and 2003 tax returns and replace them with returns containing content dictated by the government. And what's more, that the government asked the court to order us to conceal the fact that this content was not actually our own testimony, and yet we had to sign the documents under penalty of perjury saying that it was. Unique, a completely unprecedented request by the government, an obvious violation of the First Amendment, obvious violation of the Fifth Amendment due process provisions as well, because we were in a legal contest with the government, and yet they were asking a court to order us to agree with their view of facts that were relevant to the legal contest. Absolutely outrageous.
Pete, give me your website. I'm not sure that I got it. I've got several links to your story, but what is your website?
Yeah, it's losthorizons.com. LOSTHORIZONS.com.
Okay.
Okay. So, real quickly, those were the orders that were issued by the court, and also that was one of them. And the other order was an order that the court made a finding that my first book, Cracking the Code, says it makes a particular argument. It's a false finding. The argument is not what's made in Cracking the Code, but the court was asked by the government to make a judicial finding that it said this thing that it doesn't actually say. And then my wife and I were ordered to not file returns in the future based on that falsely ascribed notion, which is that only federal, state, and local government workers are subject to the income tax. So those two orders were issued by the court at the government's request. My wife, in 2013, was charged with criminal contempt of court for allegedly not having created these ordered amended returns containing government content, and yet to be signed by her as being her own testimony. And it was alleged that she had created a tax return and submitted a tax return for 2008 based on the proposition that only federal, state, and local government workers are subject to the income tax. Both ridiculous propositions, both obvious First Amendment violations. Orders like this are manifestly in violation of the First Amendment. Recognizing this fact, and I understand that this is like a series of jaw-dropping things. Here's another jaw-dropping thing. Recognizing the First Amendment problems with these orders, in the trials that my wife was subjected to, the government asked for and received an instruction from the trial court to the jury that it is not a defense to the charge of contempt that the orders Mrs. Hendrickson was charged with disobeying are unlawful or unconstitutional. Do I need to repeat that?
Please repeat that. Let me get my jaw off the floor here.
The jury was told that it is not a defense to a criminal charge that the orders my wife was accused of resisting are unlawful or unconstitutional. In other words, the jury was being told that she could be held to a criminal charge for refusing to obey illegal orders from a court. Never before happened in American history that an instruction like that has ever been given. It's incomprehensible. It's just simply incomprehensible. But that instruction was, in fact, given to the juries in my wife's trial. And there were two trials. The first ended in a hung jury. The government came back again, got even more egregious with its fraudulent behavior during the course of trial. The hostility of the judge became much more egregious, and Doreen was not allowed to complete her opening statement. She wasn't allowed to complete her closing statement. She was constantly being hectored from the bench. It was just an unbelievable display, and ultimately ending with the government committing an overt fraud, presenting documents that it misrepresented to the jury as being impeaching of some testimony that Doreen had given the day before. This was a complete false statement. The government admitted that it was false afterwards, but in the meantime, the jury, in that second trial, convicted Doreen after all of that. We're appealing. And yet, Doreen has been now in a federal prison camp for 5 weeks. She was given 30 days to report to the camp, 60 days to report to the camp, unless she agreed to commit the perjury that was originally ordered and create the false returns for 2002 and 2003 that the government desperately needs in order to try and argue that she and I never owed any tax for those years. To this day, there's been no tax assessed for those years. And so she of course refused to commit that crime and make that lie, and so reported to the prison camp on May 15th. In the meantime, a motion for bond pending appeal, to which she's entitled, was filed with the trial court several weeks prior to that date arriving. The trial court simply sat on that motion until a week ago, when, a little over a week ago, when we filed a motion or a petition with the appellate court to order her to make a ruling on that motion so that Doreen could get the relief she's entitled to. And upon being served a copy of that petition, the trial court judge promptly issued her ruling, a denial, which was expected, but that allowed us to then go to the appellate court to seek that relief. And that's what's going on right now. But all in all, a truly scandalous and shameful performance by DOJ people and this trial court judge as well.
Is this just retaliation? Is this just revenge by the courts from against you? I mean, I can't imagine that your wife has really actually done anything to deserve a prison sentence.
Oh, no, she certainly hasn't. But I wouldn't characterize it as retaliation or revenge. The fact is that for 12 years, ever since Cracking the Code was first published in August of 2003, the government has been attempting to frighten people away from that information. They first attempted to characterize it as the promotion of an abusive tax shelter, and were trying to get an injunction to actually prevent the book from being published, and they failed in that effort. Then they came back with this lawsuit and tried to frighten people away with the pretense that a court had ruled against Cracking the Code, and Hendrickson had lost in civil court, when actually the affair was what I just described to you, a series of frauds and a fraudulent and unprecedented judgment at the end, both making a finding of something that a false finding of the contents of the book. I've never heard of that ever being done before, where a court was asked to make a declarative ruling of what a book says. Never heard of that before, and yet this is what was asked in this case, and the court was fed a false argument to claim to have found in the book. The judge in that case, by the way, who made that finding of what the contents of cracking the code supposedly are, admitted during the course of Doreen's second trial that she's never read the book. She's never read it, and yet she issued a finding declaring its contents. The series of outrageous and unprecedented things here are astonishing. But anyway, not retaliatory. It is an ongoing effort to frighten people away from this information. And the reason for that is because the information is correct. And when people acquire that information and act on it, they remove themselves from the income tax system in most cases. There are some people, of course, who are subject to the tax. But most Americans are not, and most Americans don't do anything. It isn't because they're not who they are or anything like that or where they live. It's because they don't do things that are taxable under that tax. And when they have learned that from reading and cracking the code, they act to no longer pay a tax that they don't actually owe. And that includes Social Security and Medicare taxes, by the way. And tens of thousands of readers of cracking the code have done exactly that. They have removed themselves. They're not paying the tax any longer, and they've gotten back all the money that had been collected, withheld, or paid in for years as well. And we're talking about billions of dollars at this point. And the government really, really, really doesn't like that. They do not want you. They do not want your listeners to learn the truth about the income tax, which is exclusively available in cracking the code. And because they know that when those people, when you and your listeners learn this, you will join the tens of thousands of others who have said, hey, you know what, now I understand what's actually going on here. I'm not interested.
Well,
and reclaiming your power as individual American citizens, which is what the founders intended and how they set the system up and what the current bloated, arrogant, out-of-control state does not want to see happen.
Well, let me. I have to be honest with you. I haven't read your book, and
well, I wish you would, Clay.
The reason I haven't read that is they tried to kill me in 2004. I may have made a tactical error by referring to 9/11 as an exaggerated case of Jewish lightning, but.
An exaggerated case of what? You got cut off there a little bit.
Exaggerated case of Jewish lightning. Larry Silverstein bought the building, insured it to the hilt, and blew it up 3 months later. And it was it was bad property. It was condemned, and I revealed that in my March 2004 issue with Building Number 7 on the cover. Building Number 7. Oops, no plane hit that. But
yeah, 7 was definitely an anomaly. I don't know that what got done to it had anything to do with Larry Silverstein's ethnicity, but it certainly was an inexplicable event in the terms of the official storyline associated with 9/11. So I agree with you on that front. No problem. In fact, I have a very large and comprehensive page on my website on the subject of 9/11, which I think was essentially the American Reichstag fire event. And anyone who's interested can find it at losthorizons.com/911.htm.
We have that up, and that will be up on the show. And but let me go back here for a moment. Let me dig down into my memories. Over 20 years ago, I was doing quite well. I was making pretty good money, and I did pay into Social Security, and I probably did pay some taxes until they tried to charge me a tax for a corporation that I'd resigned from and I'd been out of for a year. And I got a knock on the door, and it was an IRS agent. I said, you know what, I'm going to do something I've never done before. Come on in. Come on in. See this house? I don't own it. See that truck out there? I don't own that. Now, those computers are mine, but that's tools of my trade. You can't have them. Now, I'm not only not paying this fraudulent tax, I'm never filing again. You want to put the cuffs on me and take me away now? And the IRS agent looked at me and he said, no, I'm just going to rule you uncollectible. And I said, well, that's fine. That's fine. I'll see that I stay that way. And
yeah, that is a not unusual default escape hatch for them when they're dealing with somebody that's going to be more trouble than they think it's going to be worth.
They decided I didn't owe any money, and I never did file another tax returns, but I did work with Lynn Meredith, and Lynn Meredith did a book called Vultures and Eagles Clothing, and I sold a hell of a lot of those books, and I held seminars and invited Lynn to them, and she got sentenced to prison also. But I think it was for her trust, not necessarily the information in her book. Irwin Schiff was on my show, and I'm not advocating that Irwin Schiff was exactly accurate. But if you would tell me the difference between you and those two authors, your book and those and their books. And what, if you can, give me a little bit of essence. You got all the time in the world here to do this.
Okay. With all due respect to the good intentions and efforts of Irwin in particular, whose work I'm pretty familiar with, and Ms. Meredith's.
Federal Mafia, I believe, was Irwin's book.
Yes, I'm much less familiar with Lynn Meredith's work, but presuming her intentions to have been honorable and so forth. So with all due respect to those two, the difference between my work and theirs is that mine is correct and theirs was not. That of course is, a flippant comment, but it's important that it be understood. There is no similarity in content between their work and mine. The income tax is an excise tax. It is a tax on the gainful exercise of federal privileges, and it always has been. It began in 1862. It's never been repealed since that time. The tax we have today is the 1862 tax. There obviously have been many additions to it over the years since that time. In fact, virtually every 2 years for almost the entire span of years between 1862 and today, we have some sort of tax-related act of Congress that sometimes makes modifications of one kind, sometimes it adds things, what have you. But today's tax is, in fact, the 1862 tax. In fact, interestingly, the actual preamble to the 1939 Internal Revenue Code, which was the codification of all then existing tax law, federal tax law, specifically declares itself to resort to the enactments in 1862. And if you look at the derivation tables in the current tax code, Title 26, now currently known as the Income Tax or IRC of 1986, those derivation tables specifically acknowledge the derivation of the current code from the enactments of Congress going back into the 1860s. Probably 40% of the current Internal Revenue Code was written in the 1860s. So it is a tax that predates the 16th Amendment by 40 years or more, actually 50 years. It has nothing to do with the 16th Amendment. The 16th Amendment did not authorize the tax. It didn't initiate the tax. It did nothing except close a modest and minor loophole opened by a Supreme Court ruling in 1895 called Pollock versus Farmers Loan and Trust. That ruling provided a loophole protecting a certain class of what otherwise of earnings gains that otherwise qualified for the tax from the application of the tax by finding that particular application to constitute a direct tax, something that was impermissible, and as a consequence of that, dividend and rent recipients whose dividends and rents were, in fact, the consequence of exercising federal privileges were nonetheless protected from the tax by the reasoning of this court. And the 16th Amendment is an overruling of that court decision, saying that those gains can be taxed without apportionment, contrary to what the court had said in that appellate court ruling. By no means did it open the door to anything new, and in fact, after the 16th Amendment, the Supreme Court repeatedly said that the amendment does not create some kind of new tax, some sort of unapportioned direct tax or anything like that. It doesn't do that. All it does is overrule what the Supreme Court said in Pollock versus Farmers Loan and Trust. On my website, I have posted, in fact, the Cornell Law Review and the Harvard Law Review articles from immediately after the landmark Supreme Court ruling determining and establishing and declaring the meaning and effect of the 16th Amendment, which was issued in 1916, Bruchaber versus Union Pacific Railroad, in which the court says that the amendment didn't create a new version of a tax, some sort of hybrid, that's both direct and yet unapportioned or anything like that. It did nothing of that sort. The court, in that unanimous decision in Bruchaber, the court declares the tax to be an excise, as it always has been. An excise is a tax on privilege. It always has been. An excise is an indirect tax. It's a tax that is not imposed by government on anything. It is a tax that arises in its incidence with the voluntary decisions of the people who then have if they have indeed chosen to engage in the activities that are subject to the tax, then become so subject. So
let me stop you for just a moment. Let me stop you for just a moment. From what you are saying here, I have told people and believe in my heart that the Federal Reserve is our biggest problem here today in this country. And I've always believed that the IRS was simply the collection agent for a private bank, and this bank is issuing money that they're charging us interest on. To me, that is a total fraud. How do they fit in? If this goes back, if the income tax goes back before the Federal Reserve, how does that balance out? Am I wrong about the Federal Reserve?
Well, let me say one thing. You're very sharp in recognizing immediately that there's an issue with the income tax origin in 1862 and the Federal Reserve, which of course was not until 1913. No, you're correct. The tax is not related directly to the Federal Reserve. The two were not created together, and they do not function that way. Certainly, a part of what's collected under the income tax does indeed get paid out in terms of interest payments on Federal Reserve notes, but not because it's earmarked specifically for that purpose or because the tax exists for that reason. It's just because what the tax brings in goes into one big pot in the Treasury, and all of government expenses are paid out of that pot. So some portion of what comes in the income tax gets paid on the federal debt interest. Also, some portion of what the feds collect in tariffs gets paid to the interest on the federal debt, and some portion of what the government collects in park fees and whatever else, many other forms of revenue. They all go into the pot. Everything comes out of that pot, and there is perhaps a relationship between the Federal Reserve and the income tax in this respect. I'm speculating about this. I will not say that I've done enough study to have come to a firm conclusion, but I have written about this a couple of times. it is very reasonable to presume or to suspect that when it became clear to the interests, the robber baron interests, in a manner of speaking, that the 16th Amendment was going to pass and that dividends paid to, or that income, quote-unquote, taxable income, paid in the form of dividends was going to again be subject to the tax, which meant that these banking interests, which are one of the specific objects of the tax, by the way, these banking interests were once again going to be paying the income tax, something that they had been protected from since the appellate court ruling 20 years earlier. When that became clear, it is possible that the Federal Reserve Act was then pushed through in the dead of night, as it was, after the Jekyll Island, the secret meeting on Jekyll Island, and the pushing through of this tax on Christmas Eve in 1912, I think, that the bill came out of the Senate. That this happened because, recognizing that the income tax was now once again going to be tapping a large portion of their profits, these interests looked for another means of fattening their pocketbooks. And the Federal Reserve offered itself as a mechanism for that process. And so the two were, the resumption of the income tax in 1913 coincided roughly with the adoption of the Federal Reserve. It's possible that that connection exists.
Is the IRS the collection agency now for the Federal Reserve? I mean, does any of that, is our whole system just fraudulent now?
It's a collection agency for the United States. It's a collection and accounting department of the United States. The United States, is entitled to operate, with economic interests, and it does, and the IRS is there to, account for and collect in connection with that kind of legislation. So it existed before the Federal Reserve, and it would exist if there was no Federal Reserve. The thing about excise taxes in particular, by the way, which is what the IRS is related to most closely, is that they are pieces of the action tax. That's essentially the meaning of excise. It's a piece of the action. You use the government stuff, you make money doing it, they get a part of the profits. That's the way that the type of structure works. And so in a manner of speaking, it really is reasonable to view the income tax as more of a fee than it is a tax. It's not a direct tax, and that means that it isn't imposed by the government on anyone. It is a part of an agreement, essentially, between a person who has decided to make profitable use of public stuff, federal stuff, and the agreement is that a certain portion of the proceeds will get returned, kicked back to the government. It's just that simple.
Now, this tariffs were really the only legitimate function of our taxation, wasn't it? And what happened to tariffs? I mean, I've said I believe that if we really had free trade, they'd tear that fence down between us and Mexico, replace it with tables, and let the Colombians, the Peruvians, the Mexicans bring all their goods up, drugs or whatever, cocaine, heroin, lay it on a table, pay a tax on it, pay their tariffs on it, and if we abolished all the laws against victimless crimes here, America could just pick up what they needed, take it home, and use it as they wanted to. To me, that would be real free trade. but
indeed,
they prefer to keep it illegal. So, and then I got a book out. It's called Mystery Babylon: The New World Order Unveiled, and I exposed the CIA and the Mossad's drug running operation they put together for George Bush when he was CIA director. It's called Operation Watchtower. They brought all the cocaine in to another partner they had, covering and keeping the law enforcement off a little place called Mena, Arkansas.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, as far as tariffs are concerned, certainly throughout the first 100 years, a little more than 100 years of our national history, the tariff was the primary source of federal revenue. And this reflected two things. One, a careful attention to constitutional provisions, but two, the fact that the federal government was extremely small during that period of time and didn't need or consume a great deal of resources. There were direct taxes imposed a few times during the course of that period to retire substantial debts, direct portion taxes. In fact, in the back of Cracking the Code, in the appendix, you can see the actual text of one of those enactments in which the government arrived at what at that time was a very substantial tax figure in the millions of dollars, and distributed, and that was back when a dollar was a dollar, by the way, and distributed the burden of that tax on each of the states then in existence, according to their proportion of the national population, as per the rule of apportionment. It's really kind of a fascinating read. But so we had that happen a few times during that period. But predominantly, the federal government relied on revenues from tariffs, a fee imposed or duty imposed on goods crossing into the country from outside, as its source of operating revenue. That is distinct, of course, from a protectionist tariff, which is a duty on imports that is specifically designed to burden the imports of certain kinds of goods from foreign countries for the benefit of domestic industries producing the same products. That's a different thing entirely. That's the kind that interferes with the free trade concept that you were talking about. And we, of course, have had those kind of protectionist tariffs many times. In fact, very famously, one very dramatic one was imposed just prior to the Great Depression, and many economists and scholars argue that that tariff contributed considerably to the onslaught or onset of the Depression. Also, interestingly enough, a tariff of that same sort was a very dramatic one, was in place just prior to the war between the states, and was one of the key, if not the key, complaint of the southern states that led to their withdrawal from the Union. So protectionist tariffs have a very bad history, and they are a very bad thing. Revenue tariffs, on the other hand, which are just an across-the-board, anything that comes into the country, there's a 10% tack on, or 5%, or 3%, or whatever. That's a different matter entirely, and arguably a very excellent way for government to finance itself. It imposes austerity on the government because it simply cannot bring in a substantial amount of money. It's not an insubstantial amount, but it's not anything like the $4.3 trillion that the government currently likes to spend. And at the same time, it is somewhat self-regulating in that people are provided an option in where they spend their money, either on domestic suppliers or foreign suppliers. It creates an incentive for domestic productivity, domestic industry, and in many ways is arguably a very, very good structure for financing government activities.
What is the answer? You've gone through this, and your book would help the average American here. Your book would help them get out of paying the tax. I'm at the point now. I'm 69, and I'm kind of dependent on the Social Security, which I think I certainly got a right to. I paid into it for so many years. What are we talking about then? If things were the way they should be, the way our Constitution, the way our Bill of Rights spelled it out, I mean, I don't think we need to be spending these trillions of dollars on bombing brown people, as George Carlin put it.
I agree. Yeah, if the income tax were more widely understood, as I would like it to be, the effect that it would have on the federal government would be to reduce the volume of wealth being extracted from the population, being extracted from the domestic economy, and and that would be nothing but an upside for that domestic economy. Of course, it would result in considerable increased prosperity. Obviously, if you retain the 30 to 50% of the earnings that you have created each year, your prosperity increases dramatically as compared to when you are having to turn it over to someone else. So there's no question about this. At the same time, the efficiencies of the economy would be dramatically improved because people spending their own money are far more cautious and careful and accurate with their choices than are people who are spending other people's money. And so to the degree that the state has been capturing that 30 to 52% of the gross domestic product into its own hands and spending it, it is injecting substantial inefficiencies into the process, and that costs us all prosperity. At the same time, the federal government would have a great deal of money still. Even if the income tax were confined exclusively to its proper objects, and the ignorance by which it is successfully misapplied today, and we need to talk about that soon, Clay, about exactly how it is that the tax is misapplied, because it isn't that it's applied incorrectly as a consequence of law. It's applied incorrectly as a consequence of a very cultivated ignorance on the part of the American public that is exploited ruthlessly by tax agencies. But in the event that situation were to change and more people were to come to understand the realities of the law and protect themselves from its misapplication, as readers of Cracking the Code do, the federal government would still take in a couple of $1 trillion, almost certainly, from its other sources of revenue, and it would function completely competently. It simply would have less money to spend militarizing local police departments, shooting brown people in other countries for no good reason, as you said, building bridges to nowhere in Alaska, paving greater portions of West Virginia, studying the sex life of small fish in obscure bodies of water, and passing money over to its cronies and clients, and paying its own self, its own personnel, such as to allow them to live in the lap of luxury, as currently is the case. So these would be the things that would change. It would simply become more the sort of government that most Americans would want. It would by no means be incapable of doing its job, It just would be no longer a scandal in doing that job. So that would be the effect of that widespread knowledge. We would be freer, we would be more prosperous, and government would be much more the thing that the founders and framers of the Constitution intended, and it would be much more in tune with those requirements of the founders and framers. We would have a more constitutional and a more limited government, as we are supposed to have.
Do we have now I'm in the middle of Big Spring, and we're just starting what they call Jade Helm.
Yes.
And no one quite knows what that is. I'm particularly not too worried about it. I'm not too worried about martial law. I'm not worried about the Green Berets or SEALs taking Texans' guns away. Ain't nothing. It just ain't going to happen. But we do need to keep an eye on this, and they are preparing for something. I think the bankers I call them banksters, are getting nervous because we're getting more and more information about the whole fraudulent nature of the Federal Reserve and the usury scam that these bankers are using on us. I mean, here our Federal Reserve notes, and to remind me, I worked with a presidential candidate in 1996 by the name of Charles Collins, who wanted to eliminate the Federal Reserve, and Charles was a good man, but every time he got up to speak at the Republican conventions, and I traveled with him from Maine to California, through Dallas, through Phoenix, through all of the different Republican sites. Every time he got up to speak, every cameraman on stage turned the cameras off and pointed them at the ground. They didn't want anybody to know that the Federal Reserve, that we could buy it back and eliminate a $6 trillion debt then. That's more than doubled, I believe, now. So,
yes, I think
we got the banksters, and we got all of the media companies they bought. If you control the media, you can't elect a honest man.
Yeah, that's why people like you are so important, Clay. Frankly, because you are an alternative to that co-opted mainstream media, and everyone else of your sort that is going to the effort to be an alternative voice. Very, very important, because the people can make all of the things that need to happen one by one. They do not need to do it as part of a political process. The founders structured things in the understanding that individuals looking out for their own personal interests would be the regulatory mechanism, and the only regulatory mechanism that was reliable in keeping the Constitution alive and in force. This is why we have a jury system, where it all comes down to each individual American to make his or her decisions as to whether the government is going to be allowed to employ force against one of their fellows. It is why the tax structure is set up the way it is, so that the government is essentially confined for practical purposes to indirect taxes, which only arise when an individual American has decided, or an individual person, actually they apply to whether you're an American or not an American, an individual person has decided to engage in the activity subject to the tax. It is a means by which the resources available to the state are regulated by individual decision making. It's the invisible hand that Adam Smith wrote about in regards to the economy, The founders were avid students of Adam Smith's work, and they applied his principles in their structure, their constitutional structure, in order to ensure that that individual self-interest, the most powerful force in the universe, that individual self-interest would work in favor of liberty. And it just is up to us, as those individuals, the individuals in question, to step up to the plate and act in accordance with this principle. We need to act and look out for our own self-interest. We need to look out for our economic self-interest. We need to look out for our rights. If we don't stand up and defend our rights, if we don't say no when no needs to be said, then the system's going to fail. We won't have our rights, and we're going to have what we have right now, basically, which is a massive, despotic, increasingly despotic, arrogant, and bloated state, and increasingly impoverishment and the loss of freedoms. And so our choices are simple: learn what the law actually says, stand up and act on it, and be the regulatory force that the founders and framers intended.
I've told people that the way they rule us is through consensus. And how they do that, if they come up with an idea, yeah, we're going to pass this law, we're going to pass that law, we're going to do this, and you sit there and keep your mouth shut, then you're part of the consensus, aren't you?
Yeah, that's exactly right. You have to say no. When no is appropriate, you've got to stand up and say it. It does no good. In fact, to not say it is exactly the opposite of it. Just to not say it is to acquiesce by silence. It's to say yes. When something is done, that's your agreement or disagreement, and you do not disagree, you are assumed by the law, under the law, to be agreeing. And why not? It makes perfect sense. If you've been given your opportunity to say no and you decline to do so, you are essentially abdicating from the decision-making. The one who said yes in that case is the one who will win. The world is run by the people who show up, and when you stay silent in the face of a call like that, you're not showing up. You're sitting on the sidelines, and your world is going to get run by somebody else.
Now, one of the ways that they rule us, or they live off us with this energy scam. I mean, the gasoline is part of it, but it's more than that. I've just been studying over the past a few years Nikola Tesla and his work, and I've seen demonstrations of little wire wheels that you set a magnet on the outside and put a steel ball in the middle of it, and it'll run forever. It'll run forever. I mean, we could certainly build magnetic generators, obviously, but I've also talked to people at Tesla conventions and asked them why they didn't have a magnetic generator. They said, because they'll put us in jail, they'll arrest us. It's kind of like the income tax. Now, what they've done to you is to try to frighten people to keep them from following your research, your studies,
right.
And they've done the same thing with the energy.
Yeah, I've heard a lot about that. I've heard that said and seen a lot of material to that effect, and it is astonishing the number of stories that there are out there from folks, very, very credible, very well-placed people, it appears, talking about these matters. And one of the best treatments of this is not exactly the energy thing, but it reflects the same kind of principle. is the story of Tucker, whose first name is escaping me right now. I just thought of him, and I wish I'd prepared myself better for this. I would have been able to rattle off his first name, but there's a wonderful movie about his story. Tucker was a GM engineer back in the 40s, who realized that there were things being done by that car company that were not as efficient and effective as they could be, and he had some very innovative ideas, and he broke off and started his own company, building cars, employing these innovations, and was very systematically, over the course of a fairly short period of time, essentially run out of business by the vested interests, by GM and its cronies, essentially, in government and related industries. The man was destroyed personally and financially, and as a manufacturer as well, and his innovations were then no longer available to the American public. They were kept from being available. They were kept from demonstrating the inefficiencies and failings of these vested interests, these established car companies that felt threatened by that information, and so they simply destroyed the man. And it's that same kind of affair that you're speaking of with regard to these energy innovations. It is a shameful thing. The reality is we live in a world in which people have to look out for themselves. They have to protect themselves because right and wrong are they don't have their own. Right anyway doesn't have its own army that simply leaps forward at need and ensures that justice and so forth are the rule of the day. There's a lot of bad that goes on. I think that the business of these energy innovations, what is said about them, sounds like exactly that. A lot of bad being done, and unfortunately being gotten away with because not enough people are aware of it. Same thing is true with the revelations in CTC about the income tax. A lot of bad efforts have been undertaken to keep people from understanding this reality, including what was done to me, including what is being done right now to my wife. And yet, at the same time, in that particular case, the government itself is routinely acknowledging on a daily basis the correctness of the information that they don't want you to see. Just 3-4 weeks ago, I posted one of the most recent of the examples of those acknowledgments. I post all the time. I have about 1,200 of them posted on my website at the moment, which are a sampling of the hundreds of thousands of these events that the government has acknowledged. Just 2 months ago in court, in fact, the DOJ tax attorney acknowledged billions of dollars of refunds that have been made to readers of Cracking the Code. One of the recent ones that I just posted was a man who had a CTC student, had filed educated returns rebutting allegations made on 1099s that would have, that the IRS calculated, if true, would have resulted in him owing as much as $120,000 in tax for the year in question. This gentleman, who was a doctor in Pennsylvania, rebutted these allegations and went through 18 months of harassment from the IRS, attempting to get him to reverse himself, to agree that the money he had received qualified for the tax, and that he owed this very large sum, before ultimately admitting that in fact he did not, and he had not received anything qualifying for the tax of that year, and owed nothing at all. That got posted on my website just about a month ago. Again, just one of the most recent of the 1,200 or so identical cases posted, them being a sampling of the hundreds of thousands of identical cases going on in the country for the last 12 years. And yet the government is trying to keep people from learning this information. So I guess it's so surprised that they don't want people to know it. The surprise is only the degree of corruption that's involved in that level of hypocrisy. Knowing perfectly well that what they're trying to keep people from learning is in fact true, and yet trying to keep them from learning it anyway because it's inconvenient to their bottom line. That's really all it comes down to.
What did he do? What was the? How did he do this? I'm still not real clear, and I'm going to give you the microphone here while I warm up my coffee.
Okay. What did who?
The doctor that got his.
About?
Yeah, the doctor that you're talking about. What did? How did he use your information? What did he do?
It's quite simple. He had earned a great deal of money during the year in question, which in this case was 2011, if I recall correctly, and had the people who had paid him that money had, as people always do in this country, in complete ignorance, created what are called information returns. Alleging that the money that this fellow had made was connected with the exercise of a federal privilege. Those information returns were come in the form of 1099s, what are known as 1099 MISCs. Knowing that he had not actually engaged in taxable activities in the course of making his earnings, this educated fellow said so, rebutting the allegations on the 1099s with a specific instrument designed for that purpose or intended for that purpose, and completed his 1040 to that same effect, declaring, as now been entirely agreed by the IRS to have been exactly correct, that he did not receive anything qualifying for the tax. In other words, anything that actually meets the definition of income, quote unquote, as that term is meant in the law. And the IRS at first responded to that eventually. It was, after a period of time, came back to him with a notice of deficiency saying that he was wrong and that his, or at least that they believed he was, and that his earnings did qualify, and therefore his self-assessment on his tax return of 0 was incorrect to the tune of $120,000. And this educated American grown-up refused to back down, reiterated his testimony, his return testimony, that no, his earnings were not as a consequence of any kind of trade or business as defined in tax law, and not related to any federal privilege in any other sense, and therefore were not subject to the tax. And this went back and forth for the course of a year and a half until finally the IRS said, "Yep, you're right. We got nothing. Sorry to have bothered you." All the documentation of which, by the way, is posted on losthorizons.com. Anyone who's interested in seeing that 1,200 or so examples, a very large number of which include not only the refund checks or the transcript or the levy release or the lien release or whatever was the consequence of them, but also include the filing that was done to produce that conclusion, can find them at losthorizons.com/bulletinboard.htm. There's a capital B on bulletin and a capital B on board, but they're squashed together into a single word. So losthorizons.com/bulletinboard.htm. Go there. You'll find it mind-boggling, but definitely worth the visit. And be sure to read all the way down, scroll through that list, look at examples as you wish, look at the filings that resulted in those checks, complete refunds of nominal federal income tax, Social Security, Medicare, everything, federal, state. You get to the bottom, read the section discussing the vetting that each one of those refunds has gone through in the course of being issued as well, and also the efforts to keep you from knowing what the people who got those refunds know that have been being undertaken by the government ever since Cracking the Code was first published in August of 2003. You will find it astonishing.
Now, the book is still available, and you can get it on your website, can't you? What's the cost?
Absolutely. losthorizons.com/cc.htm is where the order form or ordering information can be found. Look, the CTC is now in its 14th printing. In fact, it's absolutely available.
Okay. Let's go back and talk about your wife. How is she holding up in prison? And what are you doing? Is there anything anyone can do to help? Do you have places on your site she could get letters people could write her?
Yes, absolutely, and thanks for bringing us back to that subject, Clay. This is being very, very difficult for my wife. My wife is not she's not a legal person. She's not, she's my wife. She's a homeschooling mother and homemaker and she's been caught up in this. Some speculate that it's retaliatory against me, and I guess in a way it is. I don't ascribe even that degree of evil to the people responsible for this. Some folks do see them that way. I personally think that this is still just an effort to frighten other Americans away from information the government doesn't want them to have, and they are prepared to attempt that scare by slapping this woman around and doing it in a visible fashion in the hopes that other people will say, well, it doesn't even matter whether it's true or not. The government is, it's a rogue government, and they're going to make life, difficult for you no matter what. Happily, Americans are not the sort of breed that are intimidated by that kind of nonsense and corruption. But I think that that's what is the case, rather than it just being a let's punish Pete by beating on his wife. But in any event, they are beating on my wife, and she is in the hands of these monsters. And yes, there are things that people can do to help. For one, just in the most basic level, we have legal expenses now that are associated with this process, and we could use help with dealing with those. Doreen is in a federal prison camp in West Virginia, 9.5 hours away from home, and as a consequence, it is not possible for us to visit on any kind of routine basis. That's brutal all by itself. Cards and letters from uplifting cards and letters, hugs basically, sent by mail, are most welcome and appreciated, because we can't, I and her children can't deliver them personally by being there with her on any kind of regular basis. And her address is posted. I have a page or a section on my newsletter page that is being consistently maintained on this subject now for the duration of this outrage. Anyone wanting to get Doreen's address and learn more about what's going on in her case can find that at losthorizons.com/newsletter with a capital N .htm capital ISWD, which stands for I Stand with Doreen. And Forgive me for a moment here.
I will post that before the show is over. I will post that losthorizons.com / what?
Newsletter, NEWSLETTER with a capital N, .htm, and then the pound sign and capital I, capital S, capital W, capital D. Yeah. So the place she's in, it have at least it's not a brutal affair, as or at least it could be more so anyway than it is. It's incarceration, and it's there's nothing good about it, but it is not a maximum security affair, so it could be worse.
Okay, that was newsletter.htm. What was / what's after that?
After HTM should be the pound sign, and then capital I, capital S, capital W, capital D.
Okay. I've got losthorizons.com / newsletter.htm / pound sign.
No forward. No forward slash, just the pound sign.
Okay, that's right.
At the end there.
Pound symbol ISWD.
Yep.
Not getting it. HTM pound sign ISWD. After W.
Yeah, all caps.
Huh?
I said the ISWD is all caps, all capital letters.
Got that, all caps. Newsletter. .htm pound symbol ISWD.
Yeah, and the N in newsletter needs to be capitalized, and the ISWD needs to be capitalized. Everything else is lowercase.
The N is in newsletter is capitalized?
Yes.
And what else is the L?
Just the N in newsletter and the ISWD should be capitalized, and everything else is lowercase.
Okay, I believe I got that all right there. Let's see. Okay. I got that
right,
here. Got that up. Let me put that up on the chat room. So they've got it.
That's great.
And I will put that up on my site here. All right. What's it like for you right now? I know it's hard knowing your wife's in jail. Where are you going from here? What are you going to be doing for an encore here? You've done this book, Cracking the Code. And where are you going from here? And what can we as a people do? Basically, our pockets are being picked. We're being raked over the coals here. And I've said that anytime a communist or totalitarian regime takes over, they go after three classes of people almost in order. The first is the farmers or the ranchers because they don't want you being able to feed yourself. The second is the intelligentsia, and that's the people that are smart enough to know what's being done to them. And third, they go after the veterans and the law enforcement that might still be loyal to the old regime. I think we're in that stage right now.
Yeah, well said. Yeah, and you know the where do I go from here? Unfortunately, I'm not yet done with the tax subject, so I still have what appears to be a disturbingly long road in front of me on that front. But it is, in fact, a road that goes directly to the other issues that you were just articulating, because it is getting the income tax issue correct in the understanding of enough Americans solves those other problems. I have on my website a chart of the size of the federal government over the course of America's history, and it is a remarkable chart, a remarkable graph. What it displays is a federal government, and by the way, the federal government was, in fact, at that time, during the entire period, the largest of the three varieties of government that can operate, federal, state, and local. What it reveals is a virtual flat line of federal government size from 1789, when the current Constitution was adopted, to 1943, when the misapplication of the income tax began. We have a real hockey stick. Now, this is not Al Gore's bogus climate change hockey stick. This is the real deal. A flat line for that first 140 years. And then, when the income tax began to be systematically misapplied, and we went from an average participation rate in the country below 10% to an average participation rate in the country of 93%, where it has remained ever since, which began in the mid-1940s, the hockey stick turns upward at a sharp angle and has continued ever since. That's the nature of the problem. Prior to that misapplication, prior to the misapplication of the income tax, beginning in the 1940s, the federal government was small enough to drown in a bathtub, as Grover Norquist has famously, argued or advocated for. It was a tiny, insignificant thing. It was possible for a journalist to write in the as was done in the early part of the 20th century, that the average American would go through his entire life without any contact with any federal official at all, except the guy who delivered his mail. That's how life was when the income tax was properly implemented, when it was properly understood, and therefore confined to its actual statutory limits. And so getting that right alone solves all those other problems. I'm not worried about despotism in a government that is small enough to drown in a bathtub. Now, it may be that, it's a bad thing theoretically to have that despotism. It may be a bad thing, for the moral stature of the people involved, and for the their eventual fate when they meet their judgment day. But as far as being a threat to me personally, not so much. And so getting the income tax thing right by itself will, it's hard for somebody to say, to speak of a panacea, to speak of, the one thing that'll fix everything. But in this case, it really kind of amounts to that. There's a reason why the founders took taxes as seriously as they did. They knew how significant taxes are. The power to tax is either of one kind or it's of another kind, and they made sure that it was of the kind that would restrain the state and empower the people. And their particular purpose of all that was to ensure the people's retention of liberty, no matter how bad the government decided to behave. Even if the government ended up filled with scoundrels, if they can't take your money and have it for themselves to spend on the bad things they want to do, not much bad is going to happen. And so the founders made the provisions that they did. The tax limitations are the only thing that are in the Constitution twice. They took it very seriously. They recognized its importance. And I can say, even though, blushing while I say it, this issue is the issue. And so while, I'm looking forward to the time when I can move on to something else, and I would love to. I'd like to write, on many other subjects. I do write on many other subjects. I have to keep coming back to this one because it's that important. But I would love the idea of moving on from that. Frankly, I'm going to be 60 years old this summer. I love the idea of starting to look, towards retirement, frankly, and letting
how old?
Other people
how old again, Pete? How old again?
I'm going to be 60 in August. So I'm just a young sprat compared to you, Clay. But nonetheless, I'm starting to get towards looking to my garden more than to my computer screen if I can. You know what I'm saying?
I've made up my mind that over the next few years, I'm just going to write science fiction because, frankly, it's more believable than my nonfiction.
Yeah, well said.
Now, the attacks, talked about the farmers. They were going after the farmers first, and Richard Kelly Hoskins, I'm pretty sure you're familiar with him or you've heard of him. He said that the foundation of every civilization is the self-sufficient family farm. And they've really tried to go after that. Can you say Monsanto, Archer, Daniels, Midland? Ninth plank on the Communist Manifesto is corporate farms. Now, it's that brings up a question. I volunteered to go fight the commies in Vietnam, but I didn't go. I ended up they tried to kill me before I got there, and I realized that every plank on the Communist Manifesto is intact in America today. And when I volunteered for Vietnam, what do we have here? What form of government do we have here? Benjamin Franklin was asked that. He said a constitutional republic, if you can keep it, ma'am. And
right.
I can't determine whether we've got a communist form of government or a fascist form of government, which is the corporations. And if the Federal Reserve, I don't know if you remember Carl Klang, he said if you got your very own printing press and you can print your very own money, pretty soon you can buy up the whole neighborhood. And that's kind of what the Federal Reserve has done. They've started the corporations, the film corporations, the news corporations. It was the Rothschilds that bought Reuters in the late 1800s. Or 1900s. What form of government do we have?
Yeah, no, I agree with you completely. The Federal Reserve is an outrage. The entire fiat money structure is an outrage. And many bad things emanate from the existence of that structure, and the U.S. desperately needs a immediate return to the gold standard. We need a hard currency that is not manipulable by the state. I mean, this is it virtually needs not be even articulated because it seems to me to be so self-evident. But so it's critically important. The fact that we have a corporatocracy or some version of that now, but the reason for that too, and again I'm going to sound like a broken record here, the reason for that is also the consequence of all the wealth that is flowing into the hands of the state. When it has been said, when politicians control, buying and selling and vast amounts of money, the first thing to be bought and sold are going to be politicians. And the fact is, the reason that we have as much corruption going on in government is because government has managed to latch on to a huge amount of resources that it is empowered to distribute to its cronies and its clients, and therefore it has many cronies and clients. A corporation that is taking advantage of, exploiting special privileges that are afforded to it by government, such as subsidies, restrictions on competition, regulatory benefits, and so forth. Those things all emanate from the well-funded state that is in a position to maintain on the payroll 120,000 lawyers at the Department of Justice and vast bureaucracies. There are millions of people that work for the federal government, and the reason that there are is because the government has the money to pay them with. Make things more austere by applying the proper limits of the income tax, and suddenly you'll find a much leaner government and with much less candy to hand out to the benefit of cronies and clients. And there will be fewer cronies and clients. There will be a much more level playing field in which individual citizens are not victimized by corporations that have commanded the loyalty of Congress and the bureaucracies in Washington, because there won't be any bureaucracies in Washington capable of offering those benefits to those corporations. So it doesn't mean that everything becomes perfect by any means, but it does mean that an awful lot would improve in very dramatic ways, and we would have a much less corrupt, much less manipulated structure in this country, both economically and politically.
Before the show started, I go through my email, and I got something from Lyndon LaRouche, who I met during the presidential campaigns back in '96. And he made the statement that as Queen Elizabeth II and Prince Philip arrived Wednesday in Germany for a 3-day visit, the truly satanic nature of the British Empire was on full display. And we've talked about on the show here, we've talked about the 3 cities that rule the world. One of those is the Vatican. One of them, of course, is Washington, D.C., and the other is the City of London. And I believe the Rothschild Bank is probably located, right next to some other satanic organizations. Here, did we ever win the Revolutionary War? I mean, we let the British go back and keep their guns. Are we still, their slogan at the time was "the sun never sets on the English Empire." It was England that gave Palestine away to the Jews. And it was, I believe it was Jesus Christ that warned us about the Jews who say they're Jews but are not, are of the synagogue of Satan. So, where's the control? Do we control Israel? Does Israel control us? Or are we both and the rest of the world under the Queen of England? Have you done any, where has your research taken you down that slippery slope?
Yeah, well, as far as Israel is concerned, I don't know what goes on in in closed doors or behind closed doors in Washington personally, but I adhere to George Washington's admonition in his farewell address that the U.S. Is best free of entangling alliances and inordinate and lockstep friendships and adherence to other countries. Just from a general standpoint, I think that the U.S. Has no business being in irrevocable alliances, with no daylight showing with anybody, be it Israel or England or Great Britain or France or anybody, Germany, what have you. So I'm opposed to that degree of alliance and that formula. I also am opposed to foreign aid, largely for the same reasons. As far as Great Britain is concerned, we are not ruled by Great Britain, in my view, but we absolutely do have a history of inordinate association and affection for Great Britain. Not that I'm not affectionate towards the British culture. I'm very much an Anglophile in that sense. I'm a reader of British literature and an avid fan of that culture in many respects. It gave us many wonderful things. If nothing else, Tom Paine was born a British subject and was a gift to the world. And so Britain can claim that one. It can claim a lot as far as I'm concerned, along with many others. But I don't adhere to the notion that that anyone in Washington pays allegiance to England or Britain or the Queen or what have you. We do have an inordinate affection, though, and one of the ways in which that expressed itself that I think is most interesting and also very historically demonstrable is after World War I, during the course of which the British devalued their pound very, very dramatically from what had in pre-war times been a parity with the American dollar of about 4.5 to 1, $4.5 to a single English pound. During the war, the British inflated their currency hugely and brought that down to where it was about a 1-to-1 ratio by the end of the war. And what they did, the British came to the chairman of the Federal Reserve in the early 1920s, seeing that situation as a problem for them, just for no other reason given that I'm aware of than just national pride, and asked that the U.S. dollar, the Federal Reserve note, I should say, be inflated so as to restore pre-war parity between the British pound and the U.S. dollar, and this was done. And it was done purely because the people in government at that time were that enamored of the Brits, and so our Federal Reserve notes were devalued to a very substantial degree throughout the course of the 20s, just in order to assuage the British pride and restore the pound to a bigger relative value than the dollar. So to me, this is an insane degree of affection and subordination of U.S. interests or American interests to those of a foreign nation, not because that foreign nation rules us, but just because people who are put in a position to be able to indulge their whims in this sort of way do it. And the problem is putting people in a position where they can indulge this kind of whim. As Jefferson said, put no more faith in the goodness of men, but bind them down by the chains of the Constitution. People in power are always going to be just people. They have flaws. They have many of them are scoundrels. Many of them are idiots. They're not going to always do the right thing. The solution to that problem is not to hope to elect angels, but to arrange things so that these idiots and scoundrels can't do the bad things that they otherwise would want to. And so our problem has been allowing too much latitude, too much power to people in high office, and that's the issue.
Eternal vigilance. I mean, my career now spans pissing off 4 presidents, so.
Good for you, Clay.
I refer to them as Republicans and Democrats as 2 wings of the same bird. And the last presidential election, we were given a choice between Songbird, McCain, and Obama. So I refer to the 2 wings of the same bird. The bird ain't an eagle; it's a global vulture.
That's right.
And let's see, do I have a quote here? Let me see if I've got a quote.
Now we can see a new world coming into view. A world in which there is a very real prospect of a new world order.
The new world order does not mean surrendering our national sovereignty or forfeiting our interests.
I'm sure you remember that quote and who did it.
Oh yes, absolutely. It was one of those shining moments that really didn't shine so brightly as George thought.
Are they any closer to achieving that goal, or have we managed to slow them down or prevent them from getting that one world government of the bankers, by the bankers, and for the bankers?
You know, that's a great question, Clay, and I'm glad you asked it, because I have, like you, many years of in this fight, if you will. My political activism, my political awareness began in the 1970s, and my activism, a bit later, but goes back a lot of years at this point. And over the course of that time, as much as we have seen the badness get worse and more deeply entrenched, over the course of that time, what I have observed is the number of people awakening to the badness and the need to act growing continuously, and never more than in the last 10 years. The part of that is because the internet is there, and it has been the astonishing, relatively friction-free communication thing that it is, which is one of the reasons why the government is trying hard now to seize control of it, and it is threatened and desperately needs to be protected from any interference by the state. Another reason is because the badness has pushed more envelope than in the past, and that's one of the kind of the upsides or the silver linings to a dark cloud. Bad people and corruption can't help itself from pushing further and further, and when it pushes further and further, it awakens more and more people, and it just becomes the threat becomes that much more dire and that much more obvious, and more people wake up. The question is, it's a race between whether the badness locks itself in place first, or enough people wake up first and know how to do something about it, to stop that lockdown. And I don't know whether we're gonna, how that's going to turn out, but I think that there is good reason to hope that the American people will wake up in great enough numbers and with a great enough understanding of what needs to be done to retain their liberty when it's all said and done. It's going to be a close thing, I fear, and it's not going to be easy. But I think that it can happen. It can go well.
Well, it's kind of like I've told people, there isn't a time in history when it was easy to be free.
Boy, well said, Clay. Well said. It isn't. God knows how to place a price on his goods, and it's no surprise that something so important and divine as liberty should not come dear, and that's how it is. And that's Tom Paine, by the way, being badly paraphrased or quoted. It really is, as I said, one of the treasures that England has given to the world.
Well, remember, all of our founding fathers were rebels.
And they all were. They were all officially British subjects, but
That's right.
But every one of them, by the end of the day, a felon, according to their government at the time.
That's right. And, you know, they tried to do that with me. They tried to make me a felon. They tried to, Clay Douglas started the militia. You're damn right I did, and I did it in the governor's office. Wasn't exactly a terrorist operation. If you need us, Governor, here's my phone number. Call me. That was Governor Gary Johnson. The ADL just didn't tell you that part of it. They just wanted you to think I was some kind of terrorist. And they
manipulation of the storyline is one of their specialties, isn't it?
Yep. Well, and remember, Israel's Mossad, their whole motto is warfare by deception. So you gotta look really hard, folks, behind the thing and ask yourself: is this good for my children? Is this good for my grandchildren? You really got to ask yourself that. And yeah. I certainly appreciate your work. Now, folks, Free American 69 is my Facebook page. It's also my Skype, and it's also my YouTube. And we've got free speech on trial, IRS versus Hendrickson. Got your video up here now. And we've got the links, to so people can write Doreen. I hope she gets a lot of letters. And
I appreciate that a lot.
I really wish you the best. You're welcome back on my show at any time, Pete. All you got to do, go to freeamerican.com, look over in the upcoming shows. Any days that are blank there, they're yours if you want them.
Well, you're very, very gracious, Clay. I appreciate it very much. It's been a great pleasure speaking with you today, and you're a stalwart American yourself, and it's been a pleasure.
Well, it's my pleasure too, sir. And you tell Doreen hello, and I will drop her a line myself. I appreciate your work, and I appreciate her standing by you and not folding to the government pressure to denounce you or to, I really appreciate that. I pretty much lost my wife and from the pressure put on her, whether that was from her father or the government. I, to this day, don't know, but I sure appreciate Doreen standing by you and you standing by her.
Well, thank you for saying so, Clay.
All right, sir. Pete, thank you for being with me.
My pleasure.
Goodbye, sir.
Have a good one.
All right, folks. Going to just wanted to tell you there's going to be some new things happening on my site, and Tiger, we talked about energy.
It is the ether of the ancients, the life force energy of metaphysics, are the random fluctuations of this vast field of potential in which space and time are embedded. Now, theoretically and mathematically proven, the question no longer is, does this zero-point energy exist? But rather, can we tap this inexhaustible resource of free and unlimited energy and manifest new technologies which are both inexpensive and environmentally safe? One thing is certain, if we continue on the course of rapidly burning fossil fuels and relying on nuclear fission, the future of our civilization is in grave jeopardy. We're at a critical juncture where the ravages of industrial pollution and radioactive waste have exceeded the carrying capacity of Mother Earth. Our finite reserves of oil and gas will be completely exhausted by the year 2025 at the present rate of consumption. Large corporate and governmental self-interest ignore this pending crisis and resist change to the status quo. The question must be asked, is this the kind of world we want to pass down to future generations? Emerging on the frontiers of science, a pioneering breed of theoretical physicists and inspired inventors are challenging the way we think about harnessing the unseen forces of nature. Despite ridicule, lack of funding, and outright suppression, they are confronting an outmoded classical worldview and ushering in a monumental scientific revolution. In this program, you will witness the groundbreaking work of tireless inventors and visionary scientists who may hold the keys to true energy independence for every person on Earth, from Nikola Tesla to the reality of cold fusion and beyond. Join us as we present Free Energy, the race to 0 point.
And on that particular film, which is, you can find it on my Facebook page under Lucifer's Gift to Mankind. Gifts to Mankind. Again, we've been led down the wrong path. The wrong people have been demonized. It's kind of what happens. And on this particular link that I put up here, let's see what this is. Lucifer is the light bearer. So all subsequent translations inserted Lucifer in Isaiah and left a day star with no hint of light bearer out of the original meaning. Let's see what. How many out of fear of Lucifer enter the church in dollar bills, y'all? One of the directions that I want to go in, and maybe you will get a better understanding. And the myth of fallen angels. First, let us recount the origins of the story of the fall of Lucifer. We've been taught that Lucifer was created as a perfect angel by the Most High and given dominion over Yah's creation. At some point, Lucifer became corrupted. He became vain and sought to overthrow the Most High and become his God. Before he could succeed, the Most High cast him out of heaven with a third of the angels that followed him. Now, where was Lucifer cast to? The earth. Now the Most High had given Lucifer dominion over the creation. He would maintain this authority until the Messiah or one came to take it away. But I've simplified the myth. But this is the origins of the story of Lucifer and the fallen angels, that in effect, he was the right-hand archangel of the Most High. Now as we wake up to the truth about the true descendants of the chosen people, we must reevaluate all we've been taught. Says Jesus is not Hebrew but Greek and Latin. He was clearly of the line of Judah, and a Hebrew. So he would have had a Hebrew name inspired by the Most High. So do we have his Hebrew name? Not exactly. Why? Because his name was hidden in translation. His Hebrew name, however, know that Yah is our only Savior. So we have the only name that identifies our Savior, Yeshua, which means Yah is Savior. This all began with a challenge from my brother who told me there was no J in the original Greek or Hebrew, and Lucifer was Jesus. Both are Lucifer. What? How can this be? You're crazy. They are not the same. But he was correct. There is no J in the Hebrew alphabet and the Greek, not even today. But Lucifer and Jesus are one and the same. But Lucifer, who I accepted as fact, I found was another deception as well. So get your Strong's Concordance, look up the reference to Isaiah 14:12, reference number 196. The word is reference to a Hebrew word, Hela, which is the original Hebrew word for this passage in Isaiah. Like Lucifer, Hela is only used once in your Bible. Now there is a reference for a root of Helea, H-E-L-E-L. In number 1966, they give you a Greek refer and a Hebrew refer. Ignore the Greek, use only the Hebrew. So it references 1984, Hala. This is the word that Hala was derived from or created from, H-E-L-E-L. Now keep this in mind. Lucifer is Latin and Hela is Hebrew. The word Hala has two separate meanings, good or bad. Never both, one or the other in context. Or if the sentence it is used in, read the refer below 1984, you see them as both good and bad references. Hala, unlike Hela, appears 165 times in your Bible, H-A-L-A-L. The same word, but with a different context, dependent on usage by the writer. Both Hala and Hela are Hebrew words. Like hot water and cold water are derived from water, we must look to types of water to put warm water in context. The water was cold, the water was hot, this is Hala. The water was warm, Hala is a mixed in context. So what was the mixed meaning of Hela for this king? Boastful, arrogant, foolish king, this is the intent. O Hela, son of the morning, how art thou fallen? Hela, H-E-L-E-L. Notice also he is referred to as son of the morning. Some would twist this, but the Creator and the Savior are one and the same. Yah is Savior, so this king is considered to be a chosen of the Most High Son. This is a reference to King Nebuchadnezzar, called on even while yet in his mother womb to be king of Babylon. When the chosen people landed there, he was by no means evil. So how do I know this? Isaiah 13, my sanctified one, them that rejoice in my highness, keep in mind this King Nebuchadnezzar repented and was restored by Yah. Sound familiar? Son of not Israel, here. Remember, this is the Most High calling this king a son, a very high profile with the Most High, as with the chosen is a father. If a father has a son, does he correct him? Just a thought here. If the Most High did not place summon power at key times, do you think any Hebrews would exist even today? Just to be clear, some may last just long enough to change the law and then disappear, others for key moments to turn a page, and others to issue a warning. By the way, Lucifer is not good and bad. He is pure evil, a liar, and a deceiver. No mixing terms here. By the way, hell is the English translation of the Hebrew word. I'm not sure I agree with that, so it would stand to reason that hell should translate to Lucifer. In the Latin, Hela means Hela. Even in Latin, it's the same word. So let us return to Lucifer. The word number 1966 in Strong's Concordance. The words in Strong do not represent Hela, but Lucifer, such as morning star. Note spin. It states, due to the tradition of we're out of time. See ya, folks.